So part two is what's available to support the annotation. And so my talk is going to be organized into 4 parts. I'll introduce the HED ecosystem. Then I'm going to talk about tools for annotators. So this is looking at vocabularies, extracting that JSON template from event files, validating, and then I'll mention the new C tagger, but Young is going to demonstrate it online in the next talk. So then I'll talk about tools for analysts, and we've developed some stuff that works with little or no programming, so you can do it quick and easy, hopefully. I'll talk briefly about mapping timelines and factors for event-related analysis. And then I'll talk briefly about tools for schema developers as people who want to create their own language. So we've really made a lot of progress in the last 2 years about developing the tools and infrastructure to support HED. We've gone completely open. We're using standard GitHub development processes, and as I said, everything is open. We're now supporting a number of different venues. And we have 3 kinds of support. There's the schema support for developing vocabularies. There's the annotation support, which I think is the one that most people will be interested in. And then there's the actual analysis pipelines and use, which is, I think, the second most interesting one. And as I mentioned, we have web-based tools. We have command line stuff, Jupyter notebooks. Our code base is primarily in Python. We have a JavaScript head validator that goes with bids, and we have some MATLAB tools as well. So I'd like to start with, I'm going to now turn to what the tools for annotators are. So one of the key things is to be able to look at the vocabulary, and we have a web-based annotation tool, or web-based tool to look at and browse the vocabulary. This is done by Young Tong, who'll be talking next. And it's completely web-based. It allows you to select any of the schemas that are available and the version, and it'll then have the expandable viewer, so you can expand or contract this. So you pick a schema and you pick a version, and the items that are in bold are leaf nodes. So event is the one part of the structure that can't be expanded. You can't add things here, but everything else, basically, you can add vocabulary if you want, and it'll fit into this infrastructure. So these non-boldface nodes have big trees under them that you can expand and view. If you want to search, so well, if you hover over a term, you can get information. If you want to search, you can start typing, and as you type, the matches that will are available in the schema will come down, and you can then if you click on one, it'll browse you over to that tag. So it's a really nice thing to view the schema at. We also have fairly extensive online support in the terms of GUIs and also as web services to be called programmatically. And the basic GUIs look like this. So here's an example of validating an event file. These are the kinds of operations that are available in the online services. So we've got validation. Well, so for annotation, we have validation, generating the sidecar template from the events file, extracting spreadsheets of those templates, merging the spreadsheets back into JSON sidecars, doing various validations and other items. So for analysis, we have the option of assembling the annotations for each event marker into a single head string for each marker. various conversions. And for schema development, developers of new vocabularies have the option of validating their schema, comparing different ones to see what vocabulary terms are in one and not the other, and converting various formats. And as I mentioned, we've done a lot with wrapping our core functionality into the remodeling interface, which allows you to write JSON scripts to execute commands, and that supports all aspects. So let's just go through the BIDS workflow again. As a reminder, you have an events file. You want to create a JSON file so you can annotate. You want to fill in the annotations, and then in analysis time, you're going to assemble the annotations into head strings for each row of your events file as shown in this head assembled column. And we have tools to support each aspect of that. And again, let me emphasize that BIDS now allows you to put head annotations in other TSV files, such as participants, so that you can then include that information into your event marker annotations. So let's take a look at the Generate Sidecar online tool. So this is what it looks like. It's from the events file, and the idea is you select what you want to do, in this case, generate a sidecar template. You upload your events file. And then when you upload the events file, the online tools analyze the file for its contents, and they produce a list of the column names of the event file and the number of unique items in each column. And so that gives you information for picking which columns you want to associate head tags with. And a second thing is that there are two kinds of annotations in head. One is where you have a column and there are a number of unique values, and you're going to annotate each of those values individually. The second kind of annotation, and that's called a categorical annotation. The second kind of annotation we call a value annotation. And here you produce a short head annotation or a head annotation with a number sign in it. And that number sign acts as it's a template. And so you're annotating one annotation for the column, but it's a template. And when the annotation is assembled, the value in the events file in that column will be substituted for the placeholder number sign in your annotation. And so you then have, for value annotations, you just have to do one annotation for the whole column. So then you press process and you get a template. So, and the template looks like this. So what I selected in the previous slide, event type, and event type had 7 unique values. Here they are, and it produces dummy head annotations for these categorical annotations. It just uses a label with the column name and a label with the value that's in the unique value name. And so this will validate under head, but you're expected to actually fill these in with real annotations at some point. And the annotation tool is the thing that will help you do that. Now, as you see, the levels is also a second level item in the dictionary. And this is where BIDS expects you to put descriptions. And as we shall see, descriptions are really important. So even if you're annotating in head, it's very important to give a good description of each event. And that will be useful in several ways, as we shall see shortly. Now, the rep leg example was one that we were going to annotate by value, and because, you know, it was checked here on the left as being one to include, but it wasn't a categorical column. And here you'll see the form for the template annotation. So it still has in the dummy annotation, it still has label rep leg, so it's naming the column, but it's doing a label with a number sign. And what that says is when it comes time to assemble the annotation, substitute in the event file value there at that row in for that number sign. So you get sort of a unique annotation for each value. Now, I'm just going to briefly show the annotation assistant, which Young is going to demonstrate. But the idea is, okay, you got that JSON file, that template file, what are you going to do with it? And here's the idea is there's now a web tool that helps you to annotate that. So the idea is you upload the file. You then select the event file column and the value that you want to annotate. And you type in your description. And then you start entering head tags. And there's an option of indenting the annotation so that you can see the meaning of the parentheses more easily. Otherwise, having like Lisp, if you have lots of nested annotations, it's hard to see what you're doing. And so as you update, you can sort of see what you're doing here. If you want to look at the schema browser, that's on the right in this tool. And so you can click on a tag here to add an annotation. You can also use the search bar again, and it'll give you the options that have the word back in it. And you can then select one of these to add to the annotation at your cursor, or you can type it in. Now, another feature of this annotation assistant is that it has a little window where it continuously updates the JSON and has a validate button. So as you're adding things, you can see what it's doing to the JSON file and you can validate it right away. So another feature is that you can upload an event file and it'll show you what the assembled head looks like as you're going. So the key points on sidecar generation are sidecar templates can be easily generated using the online tools. Categorical columns need annotations for each unique column value, whereas value columns are templates. And so you just annotate one time for the entire column, but the annotation has to have a number sign in it. Text descriptions are important because tools are coming that will generate a draft head annotation from the text descriptions. And also, if you have a head annotation, it's possible to ask an AI to generate a text description from it. And by comparing those two, you can see how you're doing, whether the annotation you did actually makes sense from a meaningful point of view. Now, the online tools that I showed only work for a single event file. So if you have event codes that vary across the different recordings, then the online tools may miss some of the unique values. However, you can use the remodeling interface, you can call it from Python or MATLAB or from the command line to extract the template for the entire data set. And it's pretty easy to use. And you just do a command file with that's in JSON. And the online tools are available at headtags.org. So I'd like to show you the remodeling interface next. And this is I would consider this to be mainly tools for analysts. So the idea of the remodeling interface is that we wrap most of the functionality of the head tools into commands that you can invoke by a JSON string. So the remodeling file, which gives you the list of commands, is a list of JSON dictionaries, and each dictionary is a command. So you list the idea is you list the files and the commands in a JSON file, and then you just execute a run command, which I'll also demonstrate, to run that JSON file on all the event files that you specify. So in this example, there are two commands. The first command is just validate the event files. And so the way you specify it is you just give the name of the command, and basically the parameters are just where you want the output to be. The second example is a lot more complicated. Here we have something that summarizes the head tags. And so you still have the name of the command and where you want to store it. But this also, excuse me, allows you to provide a template with how you want the output to appear when it comes out. And so the things under the tag dictionary are, I want counts of these tags that are listed in blue under the title sensor event. Similarly, I want anything under the item tree. So it's item and any of its children under the objects title. And then there are events to exclude, and I want everything else to be stuffed under other events. So, and there's some things about whether I want to do this as with context. So things with onsets and offsets actually are included in all the intermediate points when they're counted. And there's some things about, well, whether I want to remove condition variables and replace definitions as well. So once I have a JSON file, I can apply it to the entire data set or to a single file. And I can apply it to multiple data sets, which is what is done in the NEMAR repository. So NEMAR actually uses a script that's very similar to this to produce output for all the head annotated data sets in the repository. And it looks to see whether anything has changed and runs it again if things have changed. So that users viewing the data sets can have a summary of the tags. So you'll notice here that under objects on the left, we just listed that we wanted anything in the item tree to be under the title objects. And you'll notice that we didn't have to say all the individual things. We just said objects, items, and all the things under the tree that were annotated in the data come out under the title objects. So you can organize it the way you would like to in this. And it also will automatically produce a word cloud if you ask for it. So I was going to show you an example of how this is called. So here's the example from Python. So basically, from Python, you have to give the data path of the directory, which is the root directory of your data set. You have to give the list of commands. I'm calling that the remodel file. And in this particular case, I don't want to store the results in the derivative subdirectory of the data set. I want to put it in a different place. And I'm going to give a work directory so that the output of the summaries are going to be put there rather than in the data set itself. And so if you look, this example is a typical way you would run it. You have to give a list of arguments, and the list you start with the data path and the remodel file because those are required. Everything else is optional, and it has defaults. But in this case, I don't want to use a backup. So what that means is the remodeling interface, it buys into this notion of event file fluidity. And so for a given analysis, you might want to modify the event file, but it's not a good idea to modify your raw data because you don't want to lose it, and it's easy to mess up. So the remodeling interface has a backup. So if you're going to actually modify your event files, what you should do is run the backup first, and you just run it once. And what it does is it preserves the event file tree in your directory in a backup directory. And so you can restore it. You can modify your event files for doing your analysis. You could then back that one up into a different directory so that you could then, like a checkpoint, and restore that. But you could then restore it at any time. So, but here we don't want to use a backup. And this was used because the don't update the event files, only produce summaries. That was because this is for NEMAR actually, because they're just producing summaries and they don't want to do anything with the event files in the data set itself. And then you list the directories that you want to exclude. So there might be some errant event file directories in, let's say, the stimuli directory or some of the other optional directories that are around. It gives the work directory. This -B says it's a bids data set, so look for files based on bids. Otherwise, you give it a prefix and it looks, or a suffix, and it looks for, let's say, all the events.tsv files in the directory tree. This says just produce an overall summary, otherwise it'll produce summaries for each individual recording, which is something NEMAR uses, so they have a summary for each individual recording. And this set for data sets that have multiple tasks, it says only do the task that has face perception. And this says log a bunch of output so that we can see what's going on. And here's an example with the MATLAB remodeling interface, and this produces, this is how it will be run from MATLAB. This is assuming that Python is installed in your MATLAB, and if it's not, then this can be run in also through the web services. So we support the web services through MATLAB. So all of the things in the GUI can be accessed in MATLAB. So there also is a HED search. And I just wanted to give an example of how the HED search might look. So we have more complicated searches involving commands that have, I want these two tags in a group, or I want this condition and this condition, but not this. Those compound searches I'm not going to talk about, but I did want to show you the how powerful the HED search is in finding tags in the stream. So the simplest thing is just a single tag search. So if you say age and trait, it matches the term or any child term, but it doesn't consider extensions. So age and trait has age under it, and it matches age /35 because age takes a value, but because age is a child of age and trait. Right-handed is also an age and trait, and here we don't have a glasses age and trait, but I've extended it with age and trait with glasses, and that's okay. And I've done a agent traits parent is agent property, so that also matches. And here I've grouped age in blue, and that matches. Now, if you put double quotes around it, around age, then it requires an exact match. So it will no longer match age / 35 because that's not an exact match. Now, if you put a tag with a slash, then it will expect that it matches age and its extension. Oops. And finally, if you use a wildcard, then it'll match age and 34, age and 3, or some of these, but it won't match age and 40. Now, I'd also like to turn briefly to the tools for schema developers. And this is a little bit complicated, but let me just go through it. So the question, so suppose you wanted to develop your own vocabulary, what would you do? And there are two ways you can develop a vocabulary. One is with a spreadsheet, and this is very new. We're just putting this into practice now. Originally, until very recently, if you wanted to develop a head schema, you would create a text file in MediaWiki format. And so on the bottom here, if you see, you'll see the word box with event, and sensor event is in the box below it. So the reason that MediaWiki was selected as the format, this was done a number of years ago, is because if you display MediaWiki in the GitHub editor repository, it displays the hierarchies correctly. So the way MediaWiki works is if you have 3 quotes around a term, if the leading thing is a 3 quote, oops, sorry, 3 quote, then it treats it as a title, and it just displays it with no indentation or levels. If you want to have a subcategory that is an indentation, you put a star and it'll indent 1 level and show it as a bullet point. If you put 2 stars, it'll indent 2 levels. If you put 3 stars, it'll indent 3 levels. And it'll actually show it correctly in the GitHub browser as bullet points that are indented in an outline. And so without a schema browser in MediaWiki, you can actually look at the head very nicely. And the format is mainly you give the name of the tag, so either event or sensor event, and you should have a description, and the description appears in square brackets. So the description of event is something that happens at a given time and place, and blah, blah, blah. Now, it's possible to put attributes in, and those are done in curly braces, but that's not required. But in this case, event has suggested tag, task property, and suggested tag says it's a guidance to the annotator saying, gee, if you're going to use event, you should really use a task property along with it. So the head IDs are new. So, and users don't add them. The head IDs are because we're mapping it into an ontology, and those are put in by tools. So now each head tag and in the standard schema and the library schema, each one has a unique identifier that starts with HED underbar and a 7-digit number. And these are the ontology IDs when the mapping occurs, and they're unique. We have a global head space that we map all of the head IDs in for mapping into the ontology. Now, the table above, the spreadsheet format, it turns out, understandably, that now that we have all these schema browsers and stuff, people find it easier to develop schemas with spreadsheets. And simply, there's a template spreadsheet, and basically what you have to do is under the label, which is the third column, you specify the name of the tag you want to add, and the next column you say what it's a child of, and the other thing you need to say is what give its description. Those are the only things you need to fill out. So you can fill out this spreadsheet, and when you submit it to GitHub, it will try to merge it with the standard schema or the library schema, check it, and then produce an XML, which is what the format that's used for the browser. Now, up above, I'm not going to get into it too much, but I just wanted to mention this is what the ontology terms look like for these things. And this is in Manchester syntax, but then we have to transform it to OWL for OBO, but to read it, it's much easier to read it in Manchester. So we first transform it to Manchester, and this is all done in actions. And then we transform it to OWL. So all of this is done behind the scenes. All the user sees is the spreadsheet. But the idea is we're making tools that make it easier for schema developers to develop a vocabulary and have a lot of infrastructure to check its correctness, to check how it fits into the global HED information space, and to do all the transformations to the needed formats without having users have to do that. So at this point, I think I'm going to stop and talk about and just give a summary. And the key points here are that events and metadata in general are really important to define the context for your experimental timeline. And it's really impossible to anticipate what has to be, what the form of an event file has to be for a given analysis, but you have to include the needed events, and they have whatever coding you use, it has to be clear and defined. And if you don't have the events in there that are appropriately encoded so that people could have a chance of finding out what they mean, you can't go back. And we've talked to a number of researchers who have had, we found there's a lot of mistakes in event files, and, it's understandable, but, if you don't have your logs, or the student who ran the experiments is long gone and doesn't remember, then that data is lost when it could be really of lasting value for downstream analysis. We have lots of tools for restructuring, summarizing, searching, and we're hoping to develop a number of new tools for assisting in analysis involving regions of interest, and following Nema's original idea, but other things, annotations of artifacts, integrations of timelines, and how task in intent might be captured on the experimental timeline. Those are all things that we're working on. We have lots of tools, but we're hoping, that other people will be interested, and we welcome collaboration.